Okay, so we are officially live and we're being recorded. So welcome everyone to the Stimulus Advisory Board meeting this morning. We will start with some introduction or some remarks from Mayor Tashara Jones, followed by the co-chairs sharing some information about some recommendations that we have. So thank you for being here, and Mayor Jones, we'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. Good morning and almost good afternoon, depending on where you're watching from. And thank you. I could not be more impressed, more grateful, or more ecstatic about the extraordinary work that this body has done over the past month and a half. From the beginning, you've approached your work not as policy entrepreneurs, but as facilitators responsible for giving voice to the people's priorities. In that spirit, you've issued surveys, canvassed, held a public hearing, and collected feedback from over 2,500 individuals, nearly 1% of the population of the city. And what's more, you followed through on that engagement by delivering a concrete, feasible, and impactful set of priorities for direct relief. These recommendations, and you can pick your favorites. Um, my favorites are funding mass hyper local vaccination efforts. Um, and it's hard to pick it. Well, let me back up. It's hard to pick any of the favorites of of the things that you recommended. But some of those are community violence interruption, obviously direct rental utility and mortgage relief, wrapping our arms around our most vulnerable individuals with emergency shelter, bridge housing, and permanent supportive housing. Providers supporting providers of early childhood education by expanding the city's commitment to summer and year-round youth jobs, and more. And this will frame my final proposal for direct relief, which I will share with the fellow members of the Board of Estimate and Apportionment and the Board of Aldermen in the coming days. I'm excited to move forward with this direct relief package, and I welcome the board's input and additions. The truth, however, is we're under a real time crunch. The state has mandated that CARES Act funds may only be spent through July 1st, and that means that several key programs for human services and the health department related to COVID and the housing crisis will be unfunded at the end of the month. Practically speaking, we need to advance a direct relief package through the legislative process. Board Bill 2, a boilerplate template based on Crusen's stimulus framework, which is currently in the HUD's committee. If HUD's adopts our proposed direct relief package as a committee sub, holds a public hearing, and votes it out of the committee early next week, the bill can be second read on the 25th of June. If the Board of Aldermen votes to suspend the rules, and if ENA holds a special meeting to approve the bill, which we can easily do, the funds will be appropriated by July 2nd. We need to move fast, and that's why it's worth emphasizing that direct relief is just the beginning. And I look forward to engaging in a deeper conversation with my fellow elected officials regarding the transformative long term investments we can use stimulus funds to leverage. We deliberately limited ourselves to a small fraction of the stimulus funds because, number one, the Stimulus Advisory Board recommended it as a best practice, and because we knew we'd learn a lot from the process. One thing I've already learned is if we want more to appropriate hundreds of millions of dollars in infrastructure investments in street lights, bridges, community centers, housing, transit, the mainframe of the water department, and more, we need to engage in deeper conversation with the Board of Aldermen. That's why we're exploring convening a special session of the Citizens Advisory Committee made up of 2 appointees from each alderman and 4 appointees from each member of the Board of Estimate and Apportionment to help us set the infrastructure priorities which will guide us in allocating the remainder of these funds. For now, however, we need to focus on meeting our responsibility to the thousands of individuals, families, businesses, and neighborhoods who have had an impossibly hard year and need help getting back up. These funds are not about city government. They're about delivering direct relief to the people of the city of St. Louis. And on that point, I want to close by thanking the thousands of St. Louisans who've engaged in this process with an extraordinary amount of energy and insight. I'm deeply grateful for your willingness to participate in our local democracy and committed to investing these funds in line with your priorities and for making a maximum transformational impact. This is not the end of participatory planning and the budgeting process for these funds. It's just the beginning. And with that, I'll pass it to my wonderful co-chairs, Sandra Moore and Wally Seward.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. So greetings and thank you all for being here. I'm Dr. Wally Seward. I am the, excuse me, I am a co-chair, very proud to say I'm the co-chair of the Stimulus Advisory Board and chair of the Process and Planning Subcommittee for the Stimulus Advisory Board. We're here today to officially endorse the first of a number of recommended spending plans to the Mayor's office, the Comptroller's office, and to the Board of Aldermen and the Board of E&A. It is an important moment, and I'd like to take this opportunity to address how we got here. In April, almost 30 of us received the invitation to join this advisory board. We held an initial organizing meeting, and our inaugural meeting for the SAB's work was held on May 1st. Our immediate and most pressing charge was to formulate a recommendation for the first round of stimulus spending intended to be direct relief for the most pressing needs in our community. Here we are barely 6 weeks later with a document that is not only a solid set of spending recommendations, but also an exemplar of transparent, community-informed reasoning. The document not only recommends spending levels, but also explains why decisions were made, what data and public input was used to shape these decisions, and how this first round of spending connects to the long-term spending for community relief in these trying times. The process to get here was not simple. To effectively organize a group of highly respected and very busy volunteer community leadership members of the Stimulus Advisory Board, we first established separate working groups, and these have established subcommittees to work on specific pieces in the puzzle. The Data and Evaluation Working Group designed and analyzed a public survey with over 2,600 responses. And we're going to put in the chat right now a link where you can see the final report on that survey and exactly who responded and what those responses were. In order to get the most accurate picture of need in our community, we also, and especially in our most vulnerable communities, they also mine data on existing measures of need from a number of community sources, which they will talk about in their brief. They turned all of this work around in amazing time in order to ensure that this crucially important first wave of spending went where it was needed most. The Process and Planning Committee working group oversaw the coordination of work within the Stimulus Advisory Board, i.e. the creation of working groups, the strategy for collaborative effort, and ensuring that the public had easy and accessible access to the work being done. It also oversaw a substantive, if very time-compressed, community input strategy for this urgently needed first round of direct relief spending, which reminds me off script for a moment to let everybody know, which we should have done at the top of the meeting, that we do have two sign language interpreters working today. They're going to be switching off every 15 minutes. If you need those, I'm sorry we didn't get this announcement in at the top of the meeting. Please find them and you can pin them to your screen to make sure you can see them at all times by hitting those three buttons at the top right of their box and selecting pin. So this community process included the widespread dissemination of the survey and a public meeting that allowed testimony directly from dozens of residents of the city. The Direct Relief Working Group gathered and synthesized all of this data into a coherent, openly reasoned, and comprehensive set of direct relief recommendations that has been under scrutiny adjustment until the very end, based on all the community feedback we have gotten. All this work done by a group of highly respected community leader volunteers who've devoted many of their personal time hours to this work. I'm very proud of this document put together by the Direct Relief Working Group, and I hope that the full Stimulus Advisory Board will give its consensus endorsement of that document today. As we officially provide our recommendations on direct relief to the mayor, the Board of Aldermen, and the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, I want to reiterate that our role is only advisory. From here, the political process will determine what happens with these recommendations. I say this not to shirk responsibility. We are ready to stand behind the recommendations we have created. Instead, I say this to make sure we are not making implicit promises that we can't keep. This document will likely and appropriately see changes and adjustments as it moves through the political process. I also say this to assure residents of the city that it's the folks they elected to represent them that will make the final decision on how this money is spent. And we very strongly encourage residents to engage their electeds to ensure that their most pressing direct relief needs are met in this initial round of spending. On behalf of the Stimulus Advisory Board, I want to thank the mayor for the opportunity to contribute to the future of the city. And I especially want to thank all of the residents who've taken the time to engage with this process. We look forward to much more community engagement as we look down the long road of recommending spending for the remaining $450 million over the next few years. Thank you. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to my co-chair, Sandy Moore.
Thank you, Wally, and I won't be long. Everyone can hear me okay? Yes, great. Good afternoon. I have to start there. And Wally stated, I'm Sandy Moore, co-chair of the SAB and a member of the Direct Relief Working Group. Thank you again to all of you who are returning today, and welcome to those of you for whom this is your first meeting. We really appreciate you joining the Stimulus Advisory Board public meeting. Now, as I hinted, this is our second meeting, and we will be sharing the recommendations for the use of the first tranche of stimulus money, as Wally has outlined and aptly described the painstaking process we've engaged in to get to this point. I would only add that we've worked to incorporate or otherwise address every citizen comment and observation that we could get our hands on. The bulk of today's meeting will be focused on the direct relief recommendations and just a few quick but important reminders. I serve on that subcommittee. One, the direct relief recommendations are based on citizen input and the data supporting that input. We can't say that to you enough because it's really important that you know we heard you and we have incorporated that work into these recommendations. It includes all the things that Wally said: recent stimulus surveys, 211 requests for assistance data, and data input from citizen and business support providing agencies across the city, including city departments, because they also are being added because they observe the needs and they're responsible for delivering services on those observations. So they are included in these recommendations, or their thinking is included in these recommendations. Second important and quick point, the citizen-focused direct relief is for the most pressing concerns. For the first expenditure of stimulus funds, as the mayor pointed out, we helped to point out that this is best practice. It is what is recommended as the best way to get good early results. Ask citizens, hear citizens, adapt as much as you can to what citizens tell you, and move from there. That is the best practice. Third quick point, direct relief first and then additional deep process. As Wally hinted, we've already started with citizens. That also gives you the opportunity to learn, to correct mistakes, and to do more of what works best and avoid doing things that don't work so well. And finally, quick point around the direct relief recommendations and the process we've gone through. The committees have worked collaboratively and put together these recommendations to lay the framework for the same kind of collaboration among and between the branches of government so that quickly and efficiently all branches can come together and get final decisions that they are confident are supported by the citizens to get these first resources out the door to meet the urgent needs. So with those reminders, I will now turn the meeting over to our direct relief work group to begin their presentation.
Great. Thank you, Sandy. My name is Richard Von Glahn. I use the he, him pronouns, and I am going to present the mostly a summary of the changes that were made from our original presentation on our recommendation. I will reiterate both Sandy and the mayor's and Wally's appreciation for the thousands of comments that we have gotten, the great participation on our June 3rd public hearing, and the feedback that we received there, both in person on Zoom and via internet submissions. That has all been very valuable and has helped us make a number of changes to our initial recommendation. I want to go through these priority by priority and clarify where we have made changes to our original document. In priority 1, meeting critical health needs, we added language to clarify that community outreach funds for critical health care needs may be used for a lottery or another incentive system to help boost vaccination rates. The Treasury Department clarified in subsequent material that we received after our first recommendation that this is an appropriate use of these funds. And so we wanted to add that clarity to this document. In priority 2, housing and utility assistance, we added $2 million for home repair for seniors and people with disabilities. So you will see that that is an increase in our original proposal in priority 2. In priority 3, support for our unhoused neighbors, we added $500,000 for a tiny homes program, and that is coming from a reduction in that same amount from the intentional encampment. From talking to mayors in other cities, we got some advice on that and moved that money into the tiny homes program. So the same overall cost, but a switch in allocation. In priority 4, economic relief, we are adding clarity to the city unemployment program that people who were not eligible for state or federal unemployment may be eligible for the city unemployment fund. And this is particularly due to immigration status and documentation, that we wanted to make sure that the city unemployment fund would be accessible to all of our neighbors, all of the members of our community that are suffering from the economic downturn. In priority 5, youth programming, we consolidated what had previously been 2 separate items listed as summer youth jobs and year-round youth jobs. We consolidated those into a year-round youth jobs, recognizing the timeline that we were on and when we were going to be able to move those funds, that would make more sense. And that is a $2 million line item, and then added youth-led programming to reduce violence. Those 2 items combined for $3 million, which is the same amount that the previous 2 items had combined for, but we're just sort of reworking that a little bit. Finally, We added $150,000 to communications and marketing support for the administration and capacity building, to help make sure we have strong oversight and research, and that the administration has the resources that they need to continue to do that. So those are the changes to each of the priorities based on the feedback we have received from the public. Now, it does not cover all of the feedback that we heard. There were a number of items that we heard that we recognized as critically important, but did not feel that the immediate, that this recommendation was the right place for those recommendations to come. And so we are making some recommendations as our advisory board continues to meet and look at that we address some other policies that we heard from calls from the public. Specifically, we want to recognize that we heard numerous testimonies for greater funding for early childcare and education development, as well as support for neighborhood and transit development. We think these are critical, and that we need to do some of the work to build the capacity to really build the appropriate programs to respond to the needs that we heard. And so we are going to encourage that funds from the oversight, implementation, and planning be used to develop stronger recommendations, especially around childcare and education program, and working to look at future ARPA funds and potential infrastructure funds. We are all following the debate in Washington, D.C. around a potential infrastructure deal, and we need to see the impact of that as we begin to move forward on other items. We also heard other important testimony around guaranteed income or premium pay for essential worker programs, neighborhood level planning, expanded public transit options, rebuilding our public health department infrastructure, and increasing the capacity around affordable housing. These all felt like longer system level changes that, again, could potentially be impacted by some of the debate happening at the federal level and new resources coming. And so we want to make sure that we are paying attention to that and still keeping these important items in mind and ready to respond to them. I should finally, I know I missed one thing as I was going through, that there was testimony for, as part of the direct relief for food assistance for families. We did hear that there is $1 million that is allocated as part of the economic relief for community-driven food production, processing, and distribution. And so while we heard that testimony, we did not adjust that overall number. With that, I want to pause and see if I missed anything from any of the other members of the direct relief subcommittee that they want to lift up, or if not, open it up for questions on our overall recommendations or the changes that we're making, that we're proposing.
Sounds good. So thank you, Richard, and the Direct Relief Group for doing this work. So I will help facilitate this portion. If people have questions or comments, feel free to raise your hand or unmute. All right, Jason, you first.
Just a clarification, where in the first priority, in which line item are you envisioning the incentives, the potential incentives for vaccination to be coming from?
Sorry, I believe that is in the community outreach line item. let me try to find that exact, the canvassing and community outreach under table 6. It currently has a $500,000 in the allocation.
Okay, thank you.
It looked like Wally had his hand up next.
Yeah, I'm just curious, the reasoning of moving money from the intentional encampment to tiny houses. If you could expound on that just a little bit. I'm just curious what the feedback that was that you heard that pushed you in that direction.
I believe Grace, if I can put you on the spot with that.
Yeah, of course. But Alderwoman Green, I saw you also on mic. Did you want to jump in first? Because I did miss part of the
Yeah,
speech.
I can take that since I know you weren't able to be there. When we had some conversations more with some city departments, we found that we thought that 2 million was actually more than was going to be needed for an intentional encampment. And there was a desire to do a second tiny homes development in the city. And we thought that through those talks, 500,000 would probably be enough to at least start another tiny homes development. So we would be able to shift that money without having to add any money to those particular line items.
That makes sense to me. I'm assuming the idea is that we want to move people as quickly as possible to more permanent housing as opposed to the encampment. Is that right?
Correct, and provided a diversity of options. I mean, what we really tried to do with the housing supports were recognize that there's not a one size fits all approach, and we needed to find different approaches for to meet people where they're at. And in early iterations, we had tiny homes, and then we had taken it out for the public comment portion, and then when talking with city departments, recognized that really was a missing piece. So we worked to figure out how we put that back in so that we could make sure that we were meeting the people wherever they are.
Thank you for that.
Great. Do we have other questions or comments from the Stimulus Advisory Board members? All right, Jason, is that your hand up again? Go ahead.
Apparently I'm talkative today. Just wanted to flag for the group. I don't know that it impacts this set of recommendations, but would be interested in going forward how we're coordinating with other bodies that are also receiving stimulus funds and making sure that whatever investments we're recommending can potentially leverage those funds. So for instance, St. Louis Public Schools getting direct stimulus relief funds and others. Just something I think to remain aware of, and to the extent that we can coordinate with those bodies, I think that would be beneficial.
So anybody from the direct relief group want to speak to that? I know there has been some mapping of those different funding sources. Well, the comment is taken note of, Jason, of course, very much. Thank you for the reminder, and we want to be clear about that with the public as well. Any other questions or comments on this latest draft of the direct relief priorities? Okay, hearing none. Wally?
Yeah, so I would like to go ahead and ask at this point, I'd like to make sure that we get a consensus to officially go ahead and advance this recommendation to the mayor. to the Board of Aldermen, the Board of Estimate and Apportionment. So I want to open up the board and ask, are there any objections to, at this point, advancing this out to the mayor? Hearing none, I am going to call that a consensus. Thank you all very, very much. And I believe that will officially mean that this is no longer a draft. This is now our official recommendation for the first of many rounds of stimulus spending. Thank you all for that. I'm just going to stop here for a moment. Does anybody have anything they want to add or say now that we've taken that momentous step? Okay, I'm going to hand things back over to Lisa. We have some reports from committees next, and then a few kind of things that we wanted to discuss with the full Stimulus Advisory Board. I don't expect these committee reports are going to be very long. I think we've covered a lot of what we've done already in the meeting, but I wanted to give each committee a chance to add any last points that they would like. With that, I'm going to hand it back over to Lisa.
Great, thanks, Wally. So it looks like our reports from the committee are going to go in this order. So direct relief, any other updates that we haven't talked about already from this committee, data and evaluation, and then process and planning. So who is speaking? Richard, are you still speaking from direct relief, or is somebody else speaking for the committee report out?
I hope I'm not. You know, I mean, I think our report, I mean, we've primarily been focused on the drafting of this document. So I don't know if we have additional items from anybody.
Absolutely. Does anybody want to speak very briefly about like what's next for this group? Okay, so we will talk more about that at our next meeting. So thank you very much for this group for all of the work that you've been doing. It's definitely been front loaded, and we really appreciate that and a lot of attention to detail as well. So thank you very much for that. So data and evaluation, y'all are up next.
All right, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can.
Okay, great. This is Christina Garmendia from the Data and Evaluation Committee, and we have a few updates. Just 4 items. And first off, we wanted to make sure people knew the direct relief survey is closed. We closed it upon the release of the direct relief draft recommendations, and that analysis has been finalized. The final report, the link has been dropped in the chat if someone wants to drop it again. That report is available for final readout. And then in addition, if community members have additional feedback on the plan or anything related to stimulus, that feedback can continue to be given via the People's Plan survey. And if someone could drop that link in the chat, that's still available on the city's website. And it's basically an open forum question. And that survey is still open and accepting comments. Second, while the data and evaluation team did a lot of analysis for the direct relief committee to inform these recommendations, we weren't able to do everything that we wanted to with the input that we received from the community. So that we received over 2,000 write-in comments. Some of these were essays. And so in response to that, we are building a qualitative analysis review board composed of community members and members of the data and evaluation team. And we'll be holding a qualitative analysis training next weekend, and probably another one during the week. So the purpose of this qualitative analysis training is to build the Stimulus Advisory Board and the city's capacity to analyze qualitative data, so written data, given that we received over 2,000 write-in comments via the surveys. And just for reference, that equals about 236 pages of solid text. And so not only to enable us to actually analyze it in the way that it deserves, but also to improve the research quality through community insights. So having just a single member of our team reading all those comments and trying to categorize them is not great research practice. In fact, bringing in other perspectives, people with different perspectives into the research process really adds to the quality of the findings. So we are inviting members of the public to join that process of helping us read through the comments, categorize them, and summarize those findings. And so there'll be a training next Saturday, June 19th, that's Juneteenth, from 9:30 a.m. to 11 a.m. via Zoom. And again, we'll probably have a second training session during the weekday evening. So far, we have 24 residents who have registered to participate, and the registration is still open. So we will drop that link in the chat as well, so that can be shared more widely. And so of the residents who have registered to participate, they come from a wide variety of backgrounds, some with qualitative analysis experience and some with none at all. We're going to be training everyone as if they have none. And when you register, you'll receive a calendar invite with the Zoom link, and we'll also be providing, we'll be evaluating our own training and providing some feedback to the city on the, how the process of engaging residents, not just in community engagement through surveys, but engaging them in the data analysis and research findings component of the work. And as a preview of what the data and evaluation group is working on next, we have begun drafting an evaluation framework, which will centralize our recommendations to the city on data and evaluation infrastructure. So the framework will take into account the internal capacity of city departments, as well as the comprehensive assessment of external partner capacity to assist the city with data and evaluation needs. So think universities and other research entities. This work is related to the SAB's charge to, one, identify opportunities to expand data infrastructure in city government, and two, recommend a system for the independent evaluation of stimulus-funded programs, including the reporting to city residents. And two, in related to that charge, one of the next steps we see now that we've adopted this first round of direct relief recommendations, the next step is we're recommending that we partner with members of the Direct Relief Committee to begin designing the evaluation strategy for those direct relief appropriations. So, which includes a theory of change and measures of success identified for each stimulus-funded program. So that will be, that's one of our next steps that we're recommending. And so we hope to have those meetings and have some kind of report out at the next Stimulus Advisory Board meeting. So that's the data and evaluation update. I don't know if anyone else has any additions.
Great. So another group that has a lot of stuff already so far. So we really appreciate the work that this group has done. Is there anybody else from that group that would like to speak at this point? I will note that, like, along with all of the content that Christina mentioned, that they've been, looking through 2,000 answers that are typed up that are, paragraphs, that we've also got lots of information from these initial surveys about who we have, pretty good access to and who we need to be reaching out to more. And that's sort of the, point of this process. And the process and planning group will talk a little bit more about that and our transition to thinking about public input as the next phase. So I think, Wally, are you doing the report out for that group?
I'm happy to. For just real quick, I want to lift up a question that was in the Q&A from the public, which is, will these meetings be available later via YouTube? The answer is yes. You can search for Stimulus Advisory Board, and once it's up, I'm sure the mayor's office will also tweet out those links via social media. We encourage you to spread the word about this meeting and give folks a chance to see it on their own time when it's not their Saturday morning. So wanted to do that. And in terms of a report out from the Process and Planning Committee, I think I've said most of what I wanted to say from that perspective in my comments up front, and we've got a few actually agenda items for the full Stimulus Advisory Board that we've generated out of the process and planning that are next on the agenda. So I think I'm going to say we're good for the moment to keep things brief. I don't know what else to add, but I am going to take a moment and pause and say, does anyone else from the process and planning working group have something in their brain that I completely forgot to mention that we should? All right. With that, I think, Lisa, we can move on to the next piece of our discussion.
Sounds good. So I mentioned this when the direct relief group was reporting out, but the question here is, what happens with the direct aid committee since we've made the recommendations? Does it transition into another kind of function? And the one that has been suggested is maybe a policy committee. So I think the suggestion was initially made by Wally. So I don't know if you wanted to say more about that, Wally.
I just wanted to kind of make sure we officially recognize that as a direct relief group, that first step is done, but we want to keep all those amazing policy brains in place moving forward. So just wanted to make sure that we are all on the same page about how we do that, or that we do that. Any questions or responses to that? Please, let's hear from folks on the Direct Relief Committee.
So I'm going to jump in, even though I've been moderating, and just ask a question too. So, we had another committee at one point, which was the Oversight and Management Committee, which has been transitioned over to mayoral staff more so, which totally makes sense based upon the kinds of research and planning that had to be done in coordinating with different bodies. So it may be a possibility that we need to rearrange some people from groups. People want to join other groups as well now, other committees as well. So I'll just put that out there as another possibility and ask for people's thoughts.
This is Christina. One question I have is whether there's room for, or it's time to have an infrastructure committee.
Yeah, thank you, Christina. So I'll take a stab at that question. Actually, the process and planning group had infrastructure held underneath it initially. And so we were thinking about infrastructure specifically like as designing processes like participatory budgeting and making recommendations for those things, but also longer term planning. But this might be something that we need to reevaluate again. And again, I think that like people who have not been in the process and planning group up until this point, but who've been focused on direct relief may want to join that group to talk about infrastructure as well. So I know, Megan, you have your hand up. Is it on this, or can we respond to this point first? Is there anybody? Noel, do you want to respond to this at all?
Yeah, I think we'll definitely need the help from the process group as we think about the appropriate community engagement process to identify the city's infrastructure priorities. The mayor mentioned in her remarks that we are exploring convening a citizens advisory committee. And that's something that the city hasn't done too often. And thinking about how we get that right is going to be critical, because what's kind of laid out in the city code for that process is very basic. And I think we can build some real substantive community engagement process on top of it. So would welcome the process committee's input and recommendations on that front.
Okay, great. So I just want to make sure that I heard that right, Noel. So it sounds like and Christine, I think this is important to see if this answers your question. So the infrastructure piece was the plan for this committee to address that or this board to address that was to think about the participatory budgeting processes to make sure that the public had input into these longer term infrastructural priorities. And that would be the role of the Stimulus Advisory Board on advising about infrastructure priorities. Is that correct? Not directly advising.
Well, I do think that a policy committee could also provide direct advice with respect to the infrastructure priorities, but I think the role of the process group would be the one we are describing now.
Gotcha. Thanks for that clarification.
Yeah, that's perfect, Noel. I wanted to lift up that distinction. Like, we're doing the process, but the details of the policy, that's going to be with the policy committee. And I think it's not a bad idea if there's a infrastructure subcommittee in the policy group. And again, I really like Lisa's point that we want to open this up and say, if there's a committee has these responsibilities are shifting a little bit, if there's a committee that you want to be on that you're not yet because you want to bite at the infrastructure apple, we welcome that at this point.
Great. Megan, you had your hand up.
Yes, I think that's a good segue. I think that as we've progressed as a direct relief subcommittee, and I think in sort of the wrap up, final paragraphs of the memo, we talked about some bigger buckets going into the future, and what we might need to look at going forward is if we do become a policy committee, having a series of subcommittees that, are focused on, infrastructure as it relates to, transit and roads and like brick and mortar. I think childcare is another one that we've heard a lot about. I think housing, there's probably a handful of buckets that we've heard these reoccurring themes as we've done more, public participation. And so that might be the next steps for this. And looking in the chat too, I think the intergovernmental committee, I think that's also going to be essential in this, not just with the current relief funds that have come down, but also recognizing that if we do have additional infrastructure funds that is likely going to be coming down from the federal government, that all those funds might not just be coming to St. Louis city government, that they might be going to a variety of different entities as well, and having to coordinate that. So I think for the direct relief committee, then the next steps might be identifying what those handful of buckets are and reporting back on those key areas that we think are going to need those deeper dives going into the future.
Okay, so it sounds like there's a recommendation to not necessarily like dissolve the direct relief group, but with some recommendations first. It goes into a policy group that focuses on lots of these things, and then also standing up an intergovernmental coordination committee, which goes back to Jason's point earlier in the meeting. So that's just what's on the table right now. I just want to track that conversation. Now Blake has his hands up as well.
Yes, thank you. So I'm thinking this through just now for the first time, and hope to have a chance to discuss a bit with the direct relief group. But I just wanted to note that given the mandate of this stimulus advisory board and the initial structure that was laid out and the request that was laid out from the mayor, I'm feeling a little cautious about creating new or more committees. And I think we should be really careful about that, given that this isn't meant to be a permanent group, but meant to be an advisory body to inform stimulus spending. I just wanted to make that note, that I think any any new committees that we form should be in line with the mandate that was set out from the mayor at the outset.
Thank you for that, Blake. So, I mean, it's possible that the intergovernmental committee could sort of serve instead of the management and oversight group that was before. I mean, there's definitely some moving around here. I think Mayor Jones has a response here.
Blake actually took the words right out of my mouth. And I think that we should be careful before putting together any additional committees until we see how this process goes through the first round through the board. And then, as I mentioned in my earlier comments, that we also have a citizens advisory board that's part of local code that can be activated with the input of the aldermen. And again, you know, we want to make sure that we are getting as much input from the aldermen as possible, because ultimately these bills have to be passed through the board. And I don't want the aldermen, present company excluded with Megan, but I don't want any of the aldermen to think that I am using a separate process and a separate board to usurp their authority or go around them. So let's, I would say, slow down and see how this process works through the first iteration through the board bill that gets introduced shortly, and see if this is something that we can continue. And then we'll come back to whatever those next steps are.
Thank you for that clarification, Mayor Jones. Very helpful. Okay, so it does sound like you know, the direct relief group might be meeting still to sort of talk through some things, and that's totally fine. Makes sense to continue to do that. I still think that you know, since the mandate wasn't that we were assigned to specific committees to begin with, that we probably can be fluid if you're wanting to join another group at this point. Do we have a recommendation from the co-chairs about how people could request to join an existing committee that they may not be a part of? Go ahead, Sandy.
Lisa, before we move to that next thing, can I was a little slow on the uptake here. I'll make an observation that tags on to the end of the mayor's comments and Blake's earlier observation, that whatever the next iteration of work is, and everyone has been working really hard, I would like to lift up two things as we think about it. One, that we all came to this work. I've met many of the people on the SAB directly or in civic work over the years. So we're all here because we understand and appreciate that citizens have to work on behalf of citizens. And so I want to make certain that whatever the next piece of work we are assigned, if we are assigned any, or we are requested to do, that we recognize we're doing it because we're citizens who want to serve other citizens. And the other thing I want to, so if as busy as I am, if I'm asked to serve on something else that's about making certain citizens' voices are added and listened to, I'm going to do it. So we can't make any more, the mayor said, we can't make any more promises here, but I wanted the basic premise of why we all are doing this to be locked in. And then the other thing is we've worked really hard to do everything by consensus, keeping the citizen at the center. And I'm hoping that that will be helpful to the rest of the legislative and the executive process, that they can take this stuff and not have to go back to ground zero, knowing that citizens' voices are there and it make it possible for them to go faster toward conclusions. So it's not that I'm suggesting anything, but I do think we've worked so hard at this that it's important to highlight what we are leaving on the ground, our will to continue to work if we're needed, and our methodology, which has been about collaboration and speedily, fast. This is the fastest I've worked, and I've been working a long time, promise you, to get something out for the benefit of citizens.
Yeah, thank you very much for lifting that up, Sandy. Definitely agree with all of that. And I don't think that we're talking about not meeting anymore right now, but I think that making sure that we're all very clear on what our role is and that we're not trying to be the Board of Aldermen in any way whatsoever is.
I'm not going to take that job if you're offering it.
Right, especially not for free. Sorry.
I will note that I do think that the Direct Relief Committee still has a lot of work to do ahead of it with respect to direct relief and engaging in a dialogue with both the city departments and the legislative process as questions come up about the proposals that have been submitted today, and as we work to implement them. I think there's a constructive role to play there. And then we can always follow up with further guidance down the line, because we do know that this process and the mandate will evolve.
Thank you, Noel.
And I would say that the Direct Relief group would also welcome the help of additional SAB members beyond even the Direct Relief Committee in engaging in that legislative process and helping to be that voice too.
Now, Blake and Mayor, you still have your hands up. Is that intentional or just haven't tucked them down yet? Okay, just let me know from ignoring somebody. Wally, you did put your hand up.
I wanted to bring us just back around to this little procedural point of how do SAB members choose or notify joining new groups. In the Google Drive, we have a spreadsheet with all of the SAB members that we've been pulling all of our email lists from. I would suggest that we create additional spreadsheets for each of the working groups. And then if you want to join that working group, the simplest thing is just go into the Google Drive, put your name and email address into that Google group so that every time when folks are communicating, they use those lists, and those will be updated based on who would like to join those committees. And she's not here, so I'm going to task Madison with doing that.
And Wally, I'll make sure that she's aware of that. She's going to be watching this tape afterwards. She couldn't be here today because of a family obligation.
Yeah, and instead of just only tasking her, I really want to thank her for all the work she's done in the background supporting this Stimulus Advisory Board. Thank you, Madison, and thank you for taking the task.
Great. So I think we all are clear about how to join another group. Is everybody clear about that then? Or how to suggest that you want to? Okay, great. Any other further discussion about this sort of subcommittee stuff right now? Or are we good until next meeting or until our subcommittee meeting is to talk about this again? All right, just making sure.
I offer a quick suggestion on how to sign up for other groups as well. I certainly think that setting up the spreadsheets and having folks self-update those spreadsheets makes sense, but I also think in the interim, perhaps just emailing the co-chairs in Madison with your committee requests.
Thank you, Noel. That sounds simpler in some ways. So you can add yourself to the spreadsheet, but just to make sure that you're seen, please email the co-chairs and Madison to make sure that everybody gets to join what group they want to join. So thank you, everybody. All right, so the next thing was an announcement about the Participatory Budgeting Subcommittee. So this is part of the process and planning group. Wally, did you want to say anything about this?
I think, Lisa, I know you're planning to be part of that subcommittee, so I'm going to hand it right back over to you if you just want to let folks know what that's about and what we wanted to say.
Okay, great. So yeah, so far the process and planning group has been looking at a lot of internal stuff, just trying to get us all set up and make processes run smoothly. But we decided that to actually make sure that we're focusing on participatory budgeting and the recommendations and, best practices and those sorts of things to be able to advise the mayor and her staff and any elected officials, that we needed to make a subcommittee that's focusing specifically on that. So we will start meeting this coming week. If anybody is interested in being on a participatory budgeting subcommittee, please let me know. You can email me. And I think everybody has my email address, but it's lisa.l.cagle@gmail.com. But yeah, participatory budgeting specifically is what we're talking about. And that has been a standing job of the process and planning group. We're just focusing on it more specifically now. Thank you. Anybody else want to say anything about that? Okay. And it looks like our last item on the agenda is discussion of messaging and communicating to the public the roles, activities of the Stimulus Advisory Board aside from policy recommendations.
And I think the idea here was, this came up in the process and planning group, aside from simply issuing these policy recommendations, what we wanted to open up the question: what is the kind of prospect or role of the Stimulus Advisory Board in engaging the public on this process more, letting people know that it's out there, connecting them to the recommendations that we've made, letting them understand what role these recommendations in our board plays in the full budgeting and process. So we just wanted to open it up for conversation and brainstorming on that a little bit.
Jason, go ahead.
This is just me, but it seems like we should be following the lead of the mayor's office in terms of how they want to talk about the role that this advisory board is playing. So I would lean fairly heavily on understanding the ways in which the mayor's office wants to communicate how they're using our advice in this process.
And Mayor Jones, it looks like you'd like to respond.
Yeah, and again, we still need to wait and see what happens when this process goes through the board, and then reconvene to see what the next steps are. That, and I guess I'm being a little cautious, because I want to see us succeed, and I want this process to get through the board, and then we reconvene to talk about how we get this money out. And that's what process is for, right? And so let's see what happens on the other side on July 2nd. Hopefully, if we can get it passed by then, and then we can reconvene to determine next steps.
Patrick, it looks like you would like to respond as well.
Yeah, I just want to say that what I'm hearing, and I think what I know to be true, is that this was step one. Step two is moving through the legislature. And so, a next step for this body, the general public, folks that have submitted and informed the recommendations today, this work continues with the Board of Aldermen. And so it's going to be very important to make these points and priorities clearly expressed to members of the board as they deliberate in committee and as a whole, to ensure that this work is moved into phase 3, which is implementation, right? So, I think the mayor is absolutely correct. We need to wait and see how this is received at the board, but part of that reception is expressing opinions and desires directly with members of the Board of Aldermen. And so I think that is appropriately where our focus is placed next.
Right, and to piggyback on that statement, when the I alluded in my earlier comments, when the hearing is set, it'll be important for everybody that's a part of this body to engage and sign up to provide testimony, as well as others who have previously provided testimony that are currently watching, to really drive home the point that this was a community-led engagement process, and the community will have to stay engaged to see that we get it across the finish line.
Thank you for that. Other thoughts or questions here?
So I'm really glad we had this discussion because I just want to acknowledge there's a little tension here, right, between we need to follow the mayor's lead based on the realities of the political process. We also want to make sure that we stay engaged and make sure that the community engages in order to make sure that that process hopefully gets us some good outcomes. So I just wanted to kind of acknowledge it, and hopefully that we can figure out that balance in collaboration and communication with the mayor's office. That's kind of why we wanted to have this discussion.
That makes sense. Anything else on this topic? I do want to lift up two questions that were in the comments, in the question and answer comments. One was about when people can get a copy of this recommendation that we voted on today, or that we made a consensus decision about today. And the other was about the surveys that are available for the public. So my understanding about this is that the survey that the Data and Evaluation Committee did is closed, but there's one that is still open and ongoing. Can people answer these questions for our attendees today who are so dedicated to show up on a Saturday? So copy of the recommendations and the surveys.
So first of all, a copy of the recommendations are ready. I think if somebody can grab that and stick that link in the chat, that's going to be openly available as of today. So feel free to take that and spread that around. In terms of the surveys, there was one survey, which is the direct aid survey, or direct relief survey, which is specifically for that. That is now closed because the direct relief piece is off the table. All of those numbers have been crunched, and they're working now on crunching the qualitative data. You heard Christine talk about that, so that we can use all of that moving forward. The People's Plan survey is still open. That's not directly through the SAB. That's through a different organization, but it also gives you the opportunity to give feedback on these subjects, and know that as the SAB, we're going to be pulling data from as many places as possible. And third, as we continue to move forward and look at implementation, look at spending, I am quite sure that there will be more surveys that we will be asking you to fill out and push to your community. So I hope that answers the questions on surveys, and I hope I answered it right.
Great. So that was our last item on the agenda, and the two questions that we had gotten in the question and answer that had not been answered. Are there any final things that we need to cover today? Well, thank you everybody for your participation today, and thank you to our attendees for again being here on a Saturday. We really appreciate it. Who is closing us out today?
We didn't nominate someone. I'd love to hear. Mayor, if you've got any closing words for us.
Well, again, great. Thank you all for joining, and thank you for all being willing participants. As I said in the beginning, I am thankful for each and every one of you for being present, for being for giving us, lending us your expertise in this process, and coming up with a great set of recommendations for direct relief. As I said earlier, this is just step one. And now comes the hard part, the sausage making, right? So this process will go through the Board of Aldermen next week, and we need to stay engaged and stay involved. Sign up for public testimony when the hearing is announced. Again, to let the board know that this was a public process, and that we are all concerned about the health and well-being of our citizens. And we look forward to engaging the board as we move forward. And again, this can't be said enough. I thank each and every one of you for bringing your expertise, for bringing your caring and kind hearts and minds to this process. I think what we have built here is an unprecedented community-led and community-engaged process around the spending of federal stimulus dollars. And hopefully this is something that can be replicated throughout the country, because I will be lifting this up as I speak to my other brother and sister mayors across this country, that this is a way to engage our community and to get great input on how to spend dollars at the unprecedented opportunity that we have. So thank you all for engaging on a Saturday. And hopefully I can give you the rest of your day back. You can get out and enjoy this beautiful weather, and please stay hydrated and stay safe out there. Thank you so much. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other. God bless you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you all.